I'm Brian Rosenberg. I'm the user interface designer for our tactical marketing apps at Esri. Out of our creative lab, this is my co-presenter, Kyle.
Hello, I'm a UX architect. I work on Esri.com.
Real quick, by a show of hands, is anyone currently doing any usability testing or working with a designer doing it? See one hand, a couple of people. Okay, excellent. So we're going to be talking about what it is, why it's necessary for product design, why we should all be involved in it, at least a little bit, how to set up a test and how to actually conduct a test, and then what to do with the results. So how to analyze the results, implement them, distribute them to the people who need to see results of these tests. And Kyle and I are going to split it up a little bit. We're each going to talk for 15-20 minutes and then hopefully have time at the end to really have a dialogue, ask some questions. We're really fresh on this. We've been doing this down the hallway right at Chino. We've been usability testing all week. We do it at all of our conferences all the time, as often as we can. In fact, if you want to be a participant, you can sign up and we can contact you in the future if you want to kind of see it from the inside. So, what is usability testing? Essentially, it's a simple way to get real insight into how intuitive your product is, product or service, and by actually seeing how end users interact with it. It tells you what is or isn't working with your product through putting it through realistic situations. Hopefully this is before you launch the product, so you really are launching a better product. So there's a lot of benefits. A lot of people don't realize, like, it's hard to make the jump. Like, how do you invest time into doing usability testing? How do you start this process if you're not doing it already? It's really invaluable. We're all about user-centered design, right? We're making products, mapping applications for lots of different industries for users, and they really need to be user-centered, user-focused, right? They're not for us, it's for them. This is a great way to evaluate where your product is at any stage in development or even in design stages before development, right before you launch or after you launch. It really helps with your process. Investing this time now will save you from doing iterations and having all these problems that you got to fix post-launch. It improves the user experience and overall just makes a better product. Now this goes hand in hand with a lot of team benefits, or if you're doing this on your own, there are individual benefits, but you really get to validate your ideas, right? We're all trying to figure out what the user wants, and this is really a way to find out exactly what they want, what's working, what's not. The bottom line is we're not our users. We don't know exactly what they want, and what we think they want is often wrong. Just like I'm a designer, right? So unless I'm working for Adobe or Sketch or some kind of design software, I'm not the end user, so I can't just do what I want to do. The idea is really to stop the guesswork and ask them what they want. Users come from all kinds of diverse background, and if we can find out what we want, then we can truly surpass their expectations. So not only can we save time and resources and money, and gain money in the long run from this, we can really launch a more intuitive, successful product by doing this process. It's important to remember that doing this testing can help resolve conflicts with your team, with stakeholders. Getting them involved in the process will help everyone work towards the same goal. Sometimes we have stakeholders that argue over things they want, how they want something to function, what they want it to look like, and it's not about what I or the stakeholder want it to look like or want it to do, it's really about what the user wants, right? So we really need to line up all in the same direction, shoot towards the same goal. I have a bunch of puns for foosball. I'll try to skip some of those, spare you those. Really, we want to have common goals and clear requirements to have a successful product that is truly user-centered and focused on the customer's wants and needs. I apologize if this person's here from UC, but we're allowed to use your photos. To really drive this home, I have a quick clip from Silicon Valley. So they're making light of a situation that is a real issue that people run into. Do we have volume? We have no volume. No, that's okay. We're gonna skip the video. It's not that important. Hopefully we can play it at the end. But really the issue they're having is that when they went to do testing of the final product, everyone hated it. Everyone that they tried to screen it with really didn't like what they're doing. And what happened was the owner of the product only tested it within the company with developers and never with anyone outside the company. I worked with a designer at Google who told me a story about when they first added to Google search the type ahead with the drop down, whereas you type each character, everything's changing really fast. And when they tested that internally in the company, everyone was like, oh my gosh, turn it off. I can't look at it. It's too much going on. It was a real problem. But then when they tested with actual consumers, people didn't even notice it was happening. They thought it always worked like that. And then, so you don't really know that until you test it outside. So hopefully I've convinced you that this is something we should all be doing. The benefits really outweigh the little bit of investment it takes. So let's go over how you actually conduct usability tests. So we do it in a lab. We are fortunate enough to have a lot of great resources, and we should take advantage of them more and do more with it if we could. But this is DIY usability testing. So we're going to talk about our process, but we also have a lot of tips about how to do this like guerrilla style on your own in a hallway, like go to cover other people's conferences and do this. You don't need a usability lab to do this. Oh, did you change this? Okay.
That's right, go back to it.
Oh, okay. He's adding to my presentation. Okay, so what do you need? You need to know what you're testing, right? What features, which product. You don't have to test the actual product. You can have prototypes, you can have static prototypes, you can have just designs, you can use interactive PDFs and vision. You can test with anything, and it's completely worth doing. You can still get useful feedback no matter what you have. You'll need devices, so it's great if you have analytics on what devices your end users are doing. I mean, obviously you're making desktop product, you need a desktop. We work a lot with mobile and tablet, so we do that. We try to video everything, so it's really hard when you're conducting a test to capture everything the user is doing and thinking and what they're going through. So it's great to make videos, and you can watch it later. You can send them to the team, you can edit them down, and people can kind of capture that information. For testing materials, so you're going to write like scenarios in the actual test. You need, if you can, get a physical space, the devices, and then the personnel. So you can do it on your own, but it's great if you have multiple people observing, have someone help facilitating, and of course you need participants. This is a picture actually right down the hall of our observation, or this is the testing room. So this is our materials, we have binders with our scenarios, and this is where we sit down and conduct it. And then I have a shot of, this is an observation room, so right next door, this is where like the product team is sitting there, they have headphones on, taking notes and watching both the user, there's like video of the user so you can see expression and what they're looking at, and then also the interface itself and what they're clicking on. Sometimes just like what people hover over is really interesting before they make a decision, and you don't really get that unless you're recording what's on screen. Okay, so with any usability testing, there's kind of these 4 steps. So the rest of this is we're gonna go through these. I'm gonna start with the first one, and then Kyle will finish through the rest. The first 2, defining objectives and scenarios, really goes into your testing plan. Then facilitating is conducting it, and the analyzing and implementation. So let's take a look at these in a little more depth. So defining the objective. This is how we build a test plan. Includes like what are we analyzing, what we want to learn. We really need to figure out what questions we have that we're trying to solve, and not just us as a developer designer, but you should talk to stakeholders and figure out what their concerns are, and gather kind of key areas of interest. Are you looking at navigation or the type of tool or base maps, or like what areas you want to find out more about how people are interacting and using it. We have this really awesome non-GIS example, but hey, we all wear shoes, so this is a shoe shopping site. We have some example questions. I can't read them here, so step over here. So this one, some example questions involving navigation. If we give them a task about like a budget, how are they going to do it? Which filters or sorting? What do they prefer? Which preference do they have for figuring out how to narrow down something on a budget? Concerns. So maybe you talk to a stakeholder, and they're concerned about, like, competitors all have ways to favorite and save things for later to compare. So maybe you need to figure out how easy is it to figure out to favorite something. Once you've done that, where does that go? Can the user easily figure out where their personal list is? And areas of interest, which is in the form of a question here, but that's okay. This one's about like sliders versus toggles versus checkboxes, right? So we're trying to figure out what kind of UI you want to use. Also in these early stages, we need to identify participants. So it's really important to find people that really are representative of your end user. And you want to start reaching out to them, and people really enjoy this stuff. It's a lot of fun. We offer some incentives. We have like Esri coffee mugs and cups and stuff like that. You don't have to do that if you don't have resources from that. Some really big companies like pay people to do testing and like give them gift cards and discounts on products and all this stuff. But really, people have a lot of fun with it, and they enjoy seeing things before they're launched, before they're released. It's kind of exciting. So people will just volunteer to do this. And you can do it cross department in the company, but like that Google example, it's really important just to get like your key persona, whatever that is. You need to get those people in the room playing with the thing, seeing what they do, and asking them about it. Okay, also at this stage, you want to invite observers. So these are the people that are going to watch the tests, whether it's remotes or they're watching it live or they watch the videos later. You want anyone that's you can benefit from this in the project team. So stakeholders, designers, developers, the content people doing strategy. It's great to do that. With our tests here, we have people that actually work on the product will come and stop by and sit and listen in on a test. And it's amazing when you're testing for a certain set of things, but you'll always find out things that you weren't testing for, right? There'll always be something where everyone got stuck on something and we didn't expect it. And I don't think I've ever gone through a test where I haven't been like, thank God we caught that before we launched the product. So every single test we do, it's amazing the things you learn and find out. So. Okay, with that, I'm gonna let Kyle take over. He's gonna walk you through the rest of the steps.
All right. So by now you've figured out what you want to test. What are the concerns the team has? What kinds of issues and debates you've been having, going back and forth on how to implement something. And you've also figured out who you should test with, and maybe who else on your team or your company might want to get involved. So now you really need to, kind of craft those situations that kind of enable people to walk through the thing you're working on. So this is where scenarios and tasks come into play. So scenarios are brief stories that give a little context behind why someone would be using this app or website, product, or interface. So they describe who the user is, what their general goals are in using this product or thing. Another reason why we use scenarios is, even though we're kind of recruiting people that match your end users, you can't always go to where they're at and use their own machines, use their own data. So we kind of need to give them some prompts, to give them a little bit of guardrails and kind of set up a general kind of situation or scenario where they can do kind of these tasks and run through this particular steps that users will go through depending on or for the product. So the scenarios really set the stage for specific tasks. So think of scenarios as a little bit more general. It's kind of, like I said, setting the stage, and then the tasks kind of focus down on what exactly they're doing in that interface. So it's really important when you're writing scenarios and tasks to avoid terms that are in the interface, and also avoid your internal jargon for how you describe things. That's something that will really trip people up. I know it's good to think that way. You can start, just kind of, if you want to get your ideas down, that's a good place to start. But then as you kind of go back through, you really want to double check, like, okay, the button says get started. We shouldn't tell people to get started in the task, because then we're just seeing how well they can find words in an interface. We're not actually testing that kind of, how do they solve this general goal given this thing we're putting in front of them. So in our example scenario of being in this kind of shoe shopping, e-commerce kind of situation that we're all really familiar with, so you could think of an example. Scenarios can be as simple as something like this. So you're a runner, you're looking to buy a new pair of shoes, and you need a pair that are light and within your budget. So you kind of have this general, you're kind of identifying, who this person is, to your participant, kind of this person that they're kind of role playing as they kind of go through the scenario. What they're trying to do, all right, you're a runner and you're trying to get some new shoes because you need new shoes as you run. So you're given that general goal or reason why someone would come to this website or use your product. And then you have that kind of general question or goal that they have in mind, right? So how will they use the interface to find things that are lightweight and in their budget? So given that kind of general setting, this is where the specific tasks then come in. So tasks tell the participant more specifically what they're supposed to do given that role that's been described in the scenario. So again, it's really important to make sure that these are, again, this is where you really want to avoid language. I can't stress that up. Avoid the language and internal jargon. If we call something on the team like a builder or something like that term often has its own kind of connotations, right? So people are going to interpret that in different ways. We may just say, we call it the web page or the app or something like that. And try not to get people kind of too focused on some of the kind of more specific language in there. You also need to make the tasks kind of realistic and actionable. So it needs to be something, even if it's kind of a fun kind of make-believe scenario. We were doing one yesterday about making maps using like pets and where people walk dogs. So it can still be fun, but it's still trying to get at the general kind of goals of what people are trying to do in that interface. You also make sure to, in addition to avoiding internal jargon and words in interface, try to use plain language, and especially language that reflects how your users maybe talk or think about this product or experience or whatever it is. So here, continue with our kind of shoe shopping example. So a scenario for this could be you're a runner looking to buy a new pair of shoes. You need a pair that are light and within your budget. First task, okay, so we need to, given that our goal was to see how people narrow down and find what they're looking for, the first task we can come up with is something like find lightweight shoes that fit you for under $100. So you're giving some pieces of information there to kind of cue them in, like, okay, I need to start focusing this down, and filters are a common pattern to do that. So it kind of directs them to that part of the interface. Another task you could do is ask them to save pairs that they would consider buying. So this is, again, testing that other kind of functionality that the team was interested in, or what you're trying to maybe had some issues in and weren't sure how this would work for people. And again, you just kind of tell them to, save it for later. So to recap, so far we chose the product or the interface we want to test and the features as well. We defined our objectives, got our test plan. We have our testing materials, recruited participants and observers. We've got some good scenarios and tasks. So now we actually need to like run the thing. And there's a few kind of things to keep in mind. There's a general flow to a test session lots of times. Whether or not you're kind of doing this as a one-person thing, walking around a hallway or kind of stopping people on the street or something like that, or if you have a kind of lab set up somewhere, you always need to be sure, because when people are coming, they oftentimes don't know what to expect. Most people haven't participated in a usability test before, so you kind of have to like explain a little bit, like, oh, hi, I'm so and so. I'm working on this website or this new app, and we're trying to get some feedback on it. And I was hoping you could help us out a little bit. So you kind of need to just set the stage a little bit, kind of tell them what the product is about, and what's expected of them in that scenario. Like if you're going to be recording, you need to tell them, or if you want to, if they need to sign an NDA, because if this thing hasn't been launched yet, you make sure you kind of cover those bases before they actually get into the actual tasks themselves. It's also can be helpful to start with some, after that introduction, start with some kind of icebreaker or kind of background questions, kind of start more of a conversation. Kind of helps relax the kind of setting a little bit. That can be kind of weird. People oftentimes feel like they're the ones being tested, and it helps just kind of talking a little bit just kind of helps kind of loosen things up. And also can be really interesting to find a little bit more about the context of where your user's coming from, what their day-to-day work is like. Helps you find some information that may be useful in interpreting their behaviors or what they're commenting on as through the tasks and scenarios. So after that, that's when you're like, all right, great. Let's how this works is I have some scenarios and just kind of read them out loud and kind of try to perform those tasks using this app or website or interface. And asking them to think out loud is also really important, because it helps us to, because we can't obviously be inside people's heads, it's helpful to know, like, okay, what they're thinking about, what they're looking for, what they're expecting. Oh, I clicked this and oh my gosh, I did not, well, now I'm here and I don't know how I got there. That stuff's really gold. But at the same time, you want, it can be a little bit awkward. So if they kind of start to focus and get quiet, you don't want to totally interrupt their flow. Maybe some silence is okay, but if it seems like it's kind of going on, be like, oh, kind of give a little prompt about, like, oh, tell me what are you thinking about? What are you looking for here? It's also really important to, as they're kind of going through these tasks, you need to be creating your data, right? So are these, whether this is just quick jottings or notes, or are you, do you have like some kind of screen capture or audio and video recording? Do you have like, click or touch analytics going on behind the scenes? This is when you're kind of capturing those interactions and creating that data that you're going to use to figure out, like, okay, what really worked and what didn't. After they do the tasks and scenarios, it can also be helpful to kind of have a little like wind down. So instead of just, okay, thanks, see ya, it can be a little bit abrupt, but also you also have a really good opportunity to ask some kind of reflective questions at the end. So asking, what did you like best about this? Thinking back on those tasks and the kind of pages or the app and stuff like that. What did you like, or what did you find? What was the most difficult or frustrating thing? You could also ask questions about, how does this compare to a similar app or similar website or product that you use? Some other kinds of follow-up things that can be really helpful in kind of, like I said, contextualizing some of their responses. And then be sure to thank them for all their awesome help. And like I said, if you have incentives, great. And after that, so you may need, depending on the prototype or what you're testing with, you have to go back and kind of reset the study. So you may need to go back and clear the browsing data or delete some things that people had created as part of doing the tasks. And then you do it again. So as you're kind of moderating and facilitating this session, there's a few kind of things to keep in mind. Like I said, it's kind of a contrived setting. It's not something that people normally encounter, and especially like when I don't know if you all have participated in some of our studies in conferences or somewhere before, but you kind of go back into this room at the end of the conference, and you open the door. There's a curtain. It's really weird. You don't know these people, and so it really helps just to kind of be relaxed, act like you've done it a million times, even if you haven't. You gotta fake it till you make it sometimes, and just try to be encouraging and. Like I said, sometimes you kind of just acknowledge the awkwardness, but kind of keep them talking, and just always be respectful. So the main thing that we always tell people is that we're not testing you, we're testing the design, or we're testing the app. So you can't make any mistakes. That's why we're here. We're really trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And it also helps remind people to just be honest in their reactions. Sometimes there's that interpersonal dynamic where it's like, well, this is really crappy, but I don't want to hurt this person's feelings because they obviously worked really hard on this. So it can be helpful to remind them too, like, don't worry, you're not going to hurt anyone's feelings. We're looking for honest feedback. And really, the thing is to don't make them feel dumb. I know we've all felt that way when using some piece of technology, or even just trying to find where a room is in a conference. But when people start to kind of feel like they're the ones that are wrong, that's not what this is all about, and they start to shut down too, and it just kind of gets into a bad vibe in the session. So if they get stuck, that's okay. Or if it seems like they're getting frustrated, say, "Great, thanks, that was really helpful. Let's move on to the next task." Or just kind of redirect. Or if it seems like they failed a task. I mean, they didn't realize they failed the task, but to us, like, oh man, they totally missed that thing. And they finish it, they think they're done. It's like, okay, great, let me go back to this other page or this other screen, and from this page, is there a different way that you would find that? Sometimes those redirects are like, people, like, it implies that, well, you didn't really do it the way we thought you would, but we still want to get some feedback about this thing. And so sometimes you kind of have to, like I said, just kind of be like, okay, great. That seemed like you missed that, or that didn't jump out to you. What could we have done to make that clear? Just always trying to, like I said, redirect and just, like I said, be encouraging and respectful. There's also some kind of tactical things. You want to keep track of time. There is the fatigue of really having to kind of focus on the task and do these things and talk out loud. After about 30 minutes or so, you can really tell like the energy starts to drain a little bit, and and you're also, if you're trying to you have a set chunk of time you're trying to do this thing, so you got to turn around the findings tomorrow to get back to the team and start creating your GitHub issues and put stuff in your backlog. You still need to kind of keep track of the time, make sure that you're kind of staying on schedule. Remind people to think out loud, always important. And like I said, there's kind of this balance between kind of being encouraging and redirecting, but also being able to actively listen and watch as they're going through it. So it's kind of similar to some, I don't know if people have experience in interviewing as well, but it's kind of similar to that. You kind of really need to think ahead a little bit. And maybe sometimes if you've done some test runs, you can know maybe where people might be going wrong, or based on a past test, it's like people, or the old workflow, people might expect to go one way, but now this new design is kind of force them to go a different path through this interface. And so you may be able to anticipate some of that stuff, but you always kind of need to just, like I said, listen and watch, and circle back if you need to. So if they may say something really interesting, but you don't want to interrupt their kind of train of thought and flow as they get through the task, you can wait till that task is done, or maybe wait till the end of the scenario and kind of circle back and say, when you commented on blank, when you said that, the page looked really busy, what did you mean by that? So you can always, go back and circle back and kind of pick back up on some of those kind of key comments and things that seemed worth, exploring a little further. And that's where kind of asking these kinds of follow-up or kind of probing questions can really be helpful. Because what's really great about the usability testing, especially if you do it moderated, and you're kind of with the person, you can really get that feedback, right? you can kind of see like, if people start leaning in and squinting at the screen, or they kind of go, whoa, you can kind of use those as opportunities to kind of follow up and kind of dig a little deeper and actually see like, okay, that's what they meant when they said, I didn't feel comfortable doing that or whatever. That felt awkward. So if you have observers, that's great. That means that kind of frees you up as the moderator to really focus in that moment and kind of working through the tasks and scenarios with people. And that way you have someone else that can really focus on taking the notes and kind of kind of creating that data that you can use to then figure out, like I said, what works and what doesn't work. As an observer, since you're not, you kind of have to pay equal parts attention to what the interface, as well as what their body language is, what their facial and body cues are. Like I said, some things are like leaning in, or kind of like surprise or delight, or frustration, rolling the eyes, things like that. But also being able to kind of watch if you're kind of sharing the screen or something like that, like maybe they go up to, they're kind of thinking out loud, but their mouse is drifting up to one corner of the screen, but then they zoom back over here. You got to pay attention to those things as well, because sometimes when we're so used to certain patterns and interfaces and kind of workflows and things like that. Sometimes some of that stuff is a little almost subconscious. Like we kind of do things without even thinking about it lots of times, especially with mobile apps and things like that, where there's really common patterns for things. So sometimes you kind of need to watch for how some of those like subconscious, like what do people just like instinctively do? And then it's like, oh, they maybe saw something that wasn't quite right, and then they kind of went on a different track. And so something else that is always good to keep in mind, especially if you have some new folks that are kind of new to usability testing or something like that, is it's really important just to keep in mind that it's not personal. Like we've had people like really get upset and it's not about, like I said, it's not about the participant, or it's not about the designer or the developer. We're really trying to figure out, like, does the thing work? Like, did we put these pixels in the right place, basically? So just if when you hear those kinds of moments of frustration, like that's how you're doing a good job, and that's how you're getting good feedback. If it makes you a little uncomfortable, that's like, oh man, I did not think that people would miss the button if I put it there. That's a good learning moment. That's how you're doing it right. Something else to pay attention to as an observer is the specific language people use. I mentioned sometimes you want to try to, if you can know this ahead of time, it's helpful to kind of craft some of their own words into the scenarios as well, so that the scenarios and tasks make sense. But at the same time, you also want to try to capture some of the specific words or phrases. So like real adjectives, like, oh, this is really clean, or this seems confusing or cluttered. And hopefully, you can kind of follow up on those and kind of ask them to define, oh, what about it seems awkward or strange to you? But those keywords or phrases can be really helpful, especially when it comes time to go back to the team and you get some really good juicy quotes that like just really good at kind of convincing people and conveying, instead of having people, if they can't be there or watch a recording, those key quotes are really helpful in pushing the designs along. So yeah, so like I said, there's ways that people's kind of emotions come through. Those are great things to capture, especially if people suggest something. Sometimes we're so close to the design or the product or whatever that. Or you're trying to stay close to your kind of patterns that you've developed or something like that. Sometimes you may miss something very simple and someone just suggests something. You're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Or by suggesting something, you kind of get a hint at like what they're expecting, kind of their mental model of like, well, I was expecting this to be on the same page and not take me over to somewhere else, because they see as like what they're doing was related to that thing. So yeah, the suggestions can be helpful directly, or if the implementation isn't a good idea, but it kind of lets you, gets you in their head a little bit, still helpful either way. All right, so you've run your session, you've got some great notes, and you feel like you've learned some good stuff. Now what? So this can, depending on how formal or informal you're running the study, how many people you have helping you. This could be something as, okay, here's all my notes from these past 5 sessions, and I'm just gonna, I was just testing this one little feature, and it was a quick thing. Each one was only 5 minutes or so. I get scribble down what I need to do. I can type it up to the team, put it in the backlog. That may be the extent of it. Or maybe it was a really long test because it was really involved someone's deep workflow and moving across different systems or across multiple products and things like that. And you had 3 different scenarios, each one with 5 or 6 tasks. A lot of data that you may need to kind of sift through. And so what's really helpful is to kind of do this as you go. So if you can budget time to after each session, after each test, if you can kind of reflect on that, kind of write down or kind of synthesize your notes, maybe summarize it a little bit, or if you have note takers or observers, everyone kind of gets together and be like, hey, did you see that? Did you take that away? It's really interesting when you have multiple people watching how people can see and catch totally different things. And sometimes you need to go, it's helpful to have that recording because you can go back and be like, oh, we missed that because we were all looking at our screen taking notes. But at the same time, you can really kind of start to piece together and really synthesize all those different observations people have. And if you do it after each session, it's way easier to do that than it is to do it at the end when you're tired at the end of the day and you have 20 pages of notes or something like that, and it's like, oh, this seems really daunting now, and then it's really easy to push that off or just take the things that you remember. But like Brian said, sometimes the really interesting things are also stuff that you weren't intending to test, but people commented on or interacted with, and you got some other good feedback outside of your original objectives. Something to look for is, you can start looking for patterns as well. So it seemed like people were commonly expecting something to behave a certain way after they interacted with it. Or any kind of pattern where you start seeing that repetition of issues or suggestions and things like that are always good to pay attention to. And lastly, you need to be critical of your test instruments as well, and the setting, as well as the actual facilitation and moderation of the session. Sometimes you slip up and you use a word. Sometimes you have to rephrase the task or something like that if people don't seem to get it. And you may slip up and accidentally say the word that's in the interface or something like that. Or you may skip a task or anything like that you may just want to make sure you just capture that down and be like, oh, well, it seems like this one person went straight to it, but that was because I accidentally said, create the map. And it says create the map in big letters right there. And also remember the test instruments, like I said, the test instruments, like your scenarios and tasks, sometimes those could actually be confusing. Some of our own tasks or scenarios we'll write when we go to, if we don't get a chance to kind of test it internally real quick with some folks before we put it in front of users, sometimes wow, people interpreted that task totally differently than we thought they would. And that kind of threw them off, and we needed to, looks like that task was not very, not very well written. So maybe after the first session or two, we should rewrite that task so that other people don't get confused. And the setting too. Are there lots of distractions? Are people sequestered in a weird room at the end of the conference? Were you able to go to where your users are, their own kind of setting and test in there? That's something to keep in mind as well. So some of the things that you can kind of know to look for as you're kind of synthesizing your notes and going through them is errors. Did people fail or complete this task? Sometimes there aren't strict criteria. Sometimes it's create a map, and someone either does it or they don't. But sometimes the task could be explore the page and tell me what you think, where there's no real defined success criteria there. You can also keep track of, it's good to find bugs. Sometimes this isn't a replacement for QA testing and things like that, but sometimes you do find some bugs. It's like, wow, how did we not catch that, or where did that come from? Sometimes it may just be in the prototype, or if you're testing with something that's already live, that's still a good thing to capture. Also, where, when, and how people completed tasks successfully. Of course, that's really good to know that, if people were able to kind of go through and it's like, man, took me, a week to kind of design that workflow, but people just kind of breezed through it. That was great. Showstoppers, it seems like, people couldn't get past. They couldn't go to the next task because they couldn't even figure out the first task. So sometimes you have to consider, if you're writing several tasks that maybe build after one another, you may have to kind of be able to have people jump ahead a step just in case they fail something, and then if that task is meant to carry over, you kind of need to have, you obviously need to capture that. It's like, man, that people, to do the first step of this whole workflow, to do the second step, they have to do the first step, but they didn't even complete that. So kind of when you're moderating, you also have to be able to have a way to jump people past things in case they can't complete it. And then, participant comments. Like if people, if you have a follow-up question that you consistently asked everyone, kind of capturing and comparing all those comments is really helpful. So lastly, it often pays to think about how you should present your findings. This may not always be the case if you're just kind of doing this on your own, under the radar, and you kind of I did this thing and got some good feedback, and here's some things we should work on, put them in the backlog, or we should really fix this before the next release or something like that. But sometimes there can be a lot riding if there's a lot of opinions, a lot of voices in the room. It may pay off to really think about, okay, how should we best present the things we found? Because sometimes, the research is oftentimes seen as the kind of the way to really what's the phrase that just totally flew out of my head? Not settle this. Oh, I'm sorry. It'll come back to me. But settle debates, right? It's like we have some different opinions about. Okay, I think that this thing should be at the top of the page. This thing should be at the bottom of the page. Someone says it should be sticky and go up and down with the whole time. And sometimes those, as the developer or designer, you may be the person with the least amount of say in the matter. But sometimes you really need to, when you get that task feedback and you see that, man, this one implementation did not work well, and so over here thought it was just, the ticket to solving all the problems, but it did not work. So how can we, kind of convey that to them in a way that's still productive and doesn't hurt the project? So sometimes you may need to use some supporting evidence, some direct quotes. Using some video evidence is really key. That's why the screen captures and the audio and video work really well, not just for kind of note taking and kind of analysis purposes, but when your kind of teammates and people hear wow, you see this real person, the person who we're trying to help, help them with this product and help them do their work and solve this problem, and they just can't do it. It's it's really kind of humbling and inspires a lot of empathy with people if you really have that video evidence. You can also, if you have the time, or if you're using there's lots of specialized tools, and I have a page for resources here. Sometimes you can make a highlight reel if you have these videos. You can kind of edit together a quick little kind of thing, a quick little kind of, like I said, highlight reel that shows kind of the really key moments and results and things like that. You don't have to show everything, but maybe there's one person that really kind of. Every person maybe had this issue, but you pull out one that really illustrated the problem and that people were running into. And it's also to remember that position your findings in a way that emphasizes that what we're trying to do is we're trying to really emphasize the user's perspective. We're really trying to make this not about my opinion or your opinion, but the people who are successful ultimately depends on this is what they thought. This is how they used it. And that is all we had. So yeah, we'd like to open it up, and if y'all have any questions, or we can share some experiences. We also have some extra resources here, depending on kind of your tools or bandwidth or resources or things like that. You can do. It's easier than ever to do usability testing. There's lots of great resources for free on the web. Steve Krug's books are really fun to read. They're not boring. They're not dry. They're just like really hilarious, but also really practical. Lots of, I think, most mobile operating systems, if you're testing on a mobile device, have built-in screen capture as well. So that's, like I said, that's stuff that didn't exist even a few years ago. And you can use QuickTime. Video conferencing apps and tools work really well for screen capturing and sharing. We use a video conferencing tool called Zoom, and it's great. We can have people dial in and observe stuff back in Redlands or in different offices around the country, and yeah, you just create a meeting link. People join it, share the audio, video, share the screen. Boom, and then you hit record. That's your recording. And then of course there's also every year there's more dedicated user research tools out there. Things like Usability Hub, user testing, Optimal Workshop. There's all kinds of tools out there. Sometimes they can get a little spendy, but they also have more flexible pricing. Some of them are kind of pay per study, and you can, kind of just do a kind of one-off quick thing for like $100 or something like that. But yeah, thank you all very much, and we'll take any questions that you have. Sure.
So, do you have any thoughts or suggestions about testing in field environments? So, work with mobile devices, so direct sunlight, offline, those kind of issues. And how do you do that usability testing when to actually be in the setting that people are going to be in, and it's hard to have the video recording and the observers and all that?
Yeah. So. With mobile stuff, getting that context is key, right? Because are they wearing big chunky gloves and they're trying to like navigate the interface and it's freezing cold outside, and all that stuff is like, that's gold. So if you can, I highly recommend it in terms of, but in terms of the strategy for how to get good feedback. If possible, you can use one of a recording device on the OS. Lots of those register touches as well. So when you touch the screen, it kind of has a pulse, like kind of a circle that kind of pulses out. So you kind of, if you can get that recording as well of the kind of different screens they're going through. But that's where you may need to go a little slower on going through the tasks. In a lab setting, when there's not those kind of contextual kind of things, the test you can have more tasks and kind of go through them a little quicker, but you may want to slow down the pace of the tasks a little bit so that you can, if you're the only one there, you can kind of jot some of those things down. And and again, still the think aloud protocol where you ask people to talk aloud as you're going through this is really helpful too. And then, being in context with people raises a whole bunch of interesting things that you can ask about, right? So, are people working mostly at night? Are they in a vehicle, or are they, what other kinds of weather conditions, and or how commonly do you have to do this thing where you're juggling your personal cell phone and your work tablet and your and all your other gear and stuff like that. All that kind of contextual stuff is important to take notes about as well.
In terms of click and touch analytics, how do you really parse that data? What are things that you look for? How do you turn that data into information to make your app better?
So the click and touch analytics are depending on the type of study you're doing. So if you're doing something that's moderated and you're doing maybe 5 to 7 sessions, I wouldn't be as helpful, right? But if you're doing something that's unmoderated, where you maybe have a kind of really strict set of tasks that people are going through, and you may send it out to 50 or 60 people, seeing, where people, especially if you're not using a clickable interface yet, you can see if people thought where people actually clicked, right? And you can also ask, alongside the analytics that are kind of being tracked behind the scenes, you can ask like open-ended questions where people kind of type in responses and things like that. So it's just another way to see, like, to contextualize the kind of responses you're getting. So you can kind of look at, so for example, one thing we did, we were testing a web page recently, was that people thought that the icon was clickable, but it wasn't. So we had all these, we had this kind of heat map that showed all these clicks on the icon, but it's like, that ended the task when people clicked that. It went on to we were using this tool and it went on to the next task. But it's like, okay, well, now we know that people wanted to click the icon. They didn't, we're clicking the title underneath it, but yeah, and then if you are in your product, or website or something like that, if you have kind of an analytics suite running or telemetry running already, the analytics can be helpful to help inform some of your research objectives. So even going into to help figure out what you maybe should test, maybe if you do moderated sessions instead, you can be like, it seems like people maybe aren't discovering this one set of tools or this one part of the page or something like that. And you can create a task that maybe directs people to there, or gives the general task of where they could use that tool set to solve the task, but maybe people are figuring out or finding it a different way. I see it as more as a way to just help better contextualize the kind of qualitative open-ended responses you get kind of in the moment with people. If you're doing moderated stuff, or if you're doing unmoderated things like that, it just helps you actually get a better sense of how people are interacting with the thing.
To add to that, for UI design, so we mostly work with Esri.com, and click analytics are so powerful. So when we're trying to figure out navigation and seeing, okay, no one ever went to this page, maybe this tab isn't named properly, people don't understand what's on it, they don't go to it, maybe there's content on that tab that could be moved to a different page, and we can dissolve that. So it really can help change the UX and UI, the layout, things that are being clicked on a lot and you didn't realize it, that content's really valuable, maybe that needs to move up in your hierarchy. If we have call to actions, maybe certain call to actions aren't being clicked at all. So maybe those need to be repositioned, redesigned, moved to a different page, and then we test again and see if we have improvements in those analytics. So it can also work with that, and when you do A/B testing, those click analytics are really, really important. Any other questions? And tell a brief story about yesterday. We were talking about surprises and things that you don't expect. You're testing for one thing and you find something else. So we were testing, I think I can talk a bit about this as long as I don't show you what it is. But we were testing a new sign-in, sign-out, and for ArcGIS Online. So really the test was about the different ways you can do it. And right now those paths all look very different, and we want to align that visually so it feels like you're signing into one thing, right? You can go through your enterprise account, through ArcGIS Online. There's multiple different ways. And every single participant got stuck when we were having them make a fake account at the password stage. Every single person we tested with this, there was issues at doing the password. And the problem was if you had previously put in a password, a drop down comes in when you enter the field that shows previous passwords. And that was covering up our new password list of the rules you need for your password, how many characters and things like that, right? So you couldn't see, so if this is the first time you're making a password and you can't see the rules until you actually click in the space and start typing, and that drop down disappears, right? And that's not what we want. We want people to be able to see the rules, think of the password, type it in, move on. So thank goodness we didn't launch with that.
Yeah, sometimes that's the stuff once it's kind of outside of your design tool or outside of your whiteboard, and you're like, oh, I forgot that browsers suggest things that will cover up parts of the interface. That could be a big thing that people encounter. Or even if you test it on your own device, like you have your own settings, the way you've set up your own preferences and things like that. Just all those reminders.
And it was something we really weren't thinking about because it was only a problem after we ran the first test, right? Until we had entered a password and it cached it, you wouldn't even see that problem. So it's really important to do that in different settings, different browsers, all that stuff. So, how are we on time?
I think we're pretty good. Thank you all so much. We'll hang around for a minute if you have any other questions. But hope you enjoy the conference.